Hi, this is Sherry of Storied Gifts, and I am the host for The Delicious Story. This week I'm speaking with Leah Ackerman. She is a women's health and wellness coach, an empath, and intuit. And we're going to be talking about the very painful subject of gossip, why we do it, and how to curb the kind of talk about others that makes us just feel yuck. But before that, I'd like to invite you to check out Storied Gift Shop. You'll find clothing and home decor items all meant to help you, inspire you to live your life story well. Now meet Leah. And we are recording, and I'm talking with Leah Ackerman. Again. Oh my God, we just sat here chatting and sharing all this great information, and I realized I didn't hit the record button. This is the story of my podcasting, vidcasting life. But anyway, it's okay, because we're going to cover this again, and it's going to be even better on take two. So, we're both members of Fem City, and I had reached out and asked people interested in talking about this thing, this very painful subject, really, of gossip. And you were so kind to respond. And then you even were kinder to be willing to be interviewed to talk about this. And it sounds like you have some, like anybody, you have a family and a life that, so you've got some experience with gossip, and as everybody pretty much does. We've either gossiped or been the recipient of hearing about ourselves being gossiped. So today what we're going to try and do is cover what's going on when people gossip, and some tools to help people kind of to move away from gossip into something else, something that's more beneficial to them and the other people in their lives. So I thank you for being on and talking about this again.
It's all right. We're masters now. We're pros.
I know. But before that, let's lean in, because I really did want to tell you, I've got a secret, something, I don't want you to tell anybody else, but that's the kind of gossip that I think is really the worst kind. Is the kind that involves secrets and things that aren't yours to tell. So anyway, I wanted to ask you, I know for myself, when I gossip, I finally figured out, I'm nearly 60, what's going on. But I wanted you to share your theory as to what you think is going on when people gossip.
Sure. A couple of things. I think, of course, you've got the gossip of the current events, or everybody's keeping in touch and whatnot. And that's not really the gossip that we're touching on today, because that doesn't necessarily have adverse effects like the other kind of more malicious gossip, if you will. I think that folks engage in gossip, they're deflecting away from something that they've got going on themselves. So maybe they've got something they're hiding, or maybe something that somebody else is doing is a trigger to them. And so here they want to deep dive into that, and that somehow makes them feel better, for whatever reason. That's a pretty complicated issue, and probably another conversation for another time. And then we've got the folks that project their expectations onto other people. And when they see somebody not living up to their expectations, then that's really where that gossip comes from. And again, it's because they're trying to reconcile their feelings around it and their triggers, because something has triggered them. Ultimately, at the end of the day, something about the person being gossiped about has triggered something in the gossiper, and they're doing so in order to make themselves feel better. And I also think that there's a level of power that goes along with being the person that shares news, spoiling secrets or kind of having the insider information, especially as it relates to somebody else, that real juicy gossip. Similar high to being the person that gets to tell the punchline of a really good joke, right? They've got that validation that comes in from the people that are listening to it. So that's my theory on why people engage.
Yeah. And I can say as a former terribly robust gossiper, I recognize that, gossiping was saying a lot more about me, usually fear of something I see, for example, kind of like the gawker who goes past the accident and they look on the accident. They're like, I'll avoid that. But the other thing that's going on is this fear of lacking personally, and also this fear that if somebody has something and I don't, that there's not enough to go around, and that I'm not enough as I am, that I'm not interesting enough, that I'm not doing anything interesting enough worthy of talking about that or that sort of thing. So it's definitely a fear-based behavior. And we were talking a little bit before we've been talking quite a bit, but, I don't want to blame childhood on this, but I know I had a challenged childhood. So fear was definitely a part of that, I think growing up. So I had lizard brain or reptilian brain, it's pretty active. But I guess I wanted to know if you've ever been the recipient of gossip. Have you ever been gossiped about and found out about it later?
Yeah, of course. I think a lot of us have instances where you walk in the room too, and you're clearly then the topic of conversation, and the energy all shifts, right? We've all had that, I think, at some point or another. I too had a really traumatic, challenging childhood, and so I saw examples of it from a very young age, where and it was in the form of adults intervening to try to help, but also casting judgment or speculating on what was going on at home. And then, of course, even like kids at school and my mom said this and So I have experience from way, way back when. I also, my mom was not well when I was growing up. And I remember her oftentimes coming home from work and talking about the gossip that was going on there. Unfortunately, I think with women too, we're pinned together against each other a lot in society. I think for whatever reason, we have society has a sick obsession with not seeing women tear each other down. So I think over the years, I've seen a lot of instances, and I work primarily with women. So I help them through instances sometimes like that, that really affect their self-esteem and their self-worth. And anyways, I've seen examples of that my whole life, and then working with women and specifically as it relates to, part of my job is the sexual health and wellness side of being a woman, and leaving a really lucrative corporate job to pursue a career like that full time. I was definitely disgusted of what kind of kookaroo is leaving this to go do this crazy idea. But really, what I see as my work is so important because there's not a lot of resources out there for women, and as it relates to their health and wellness, and sex care is self-care. And I know self-care is such a buzzword the last couple of years with the pandemic, but it's not going away because it's important. People are finally prioritizing it, which again, I think leads to why we're even talking about gossip in the first place. Because if you can take care of yourself, if you're on the receiving end of gossip, and even learning how to recognizing when maybe you're going down the rabbit hole of starting to participate in gossip, how you can curb that. It really not engaging not only protects the person that was being discussed, but it really protects you and your energy as well. And I think that's an important part of self-care too.
Right. And just to tag on that, I think, if I were to offer, and we're going to talk about, this all really began when you mentioned the 4 agreements, and I'm going to ask you to outline those in a minute because we'll include those as points for people to really think about. But because I've heard of it, but I never read anything about it. I just heard about it before, right? But at the top of the to-do list for the gossiper is to stop judging yourself, forgive yourself, and ask yourself, why am I engaged? Why am I talking about this? What is it I'm feeling about this situation that's making me want to vent or manipulate the storyline so that I can garner other people's, affirmation. What am I feeling? And so I think that's a good place because you can own that. You can say, I feel resentful. I feel stressed. I feel unloved. Own those things. Those are your feelings. They're valid. They're yours. They're not permanent. but they're yours.
Right.
So anyway, but you had talked about the 4 agreements. And so if you wouldn't mind sharing the 4 agreements and your experience with this.
Sure. So the 4 Agreements is a book written by Don Miguel Ruiz, who it's been around a really long time. It's a lot of folks, I think you can find it probably in the self-help section, but it's really kind of lends itself to being a spiritual book. I found it to be pretty spiritually enlightening. Some folks get triggered by the word God, so heads up, God is mentioned in there, so trigger warning, but it's not, I would not say it's a religious book. That's just the author used that to refer to source, universe, creator, like whatever you relate to. So heads up on that. I think that's important to mention. But it really comes down to they call it the 4 agreements, and it's supposed to be the 4 agreements that you have with yourself. And the subtitle of the book, and I'm going to get this wrong, but it's something to the effect of the 4 agreements, basically how to liberate yourself from suffering. So the first one is be impeccable with your word. So that totally supports what we're discussing here today. Speak with integrity. Say only what you mean, using the word to speak, and don't use the word to speak against yourself or gossip about others. Use the power of your word in the direction of truth and love. So, I think that needs no more explanation. Second agreement is don't take things personally. And this was really the one that when I read it, 4 or 5 years ago, and it was recommended to me by a business coach, actually, who works kind of on the spiritual side of things. It really blew the lid off for me, having worked, as I mentioned before, I came from more of a traditional corporate background, and then realizing how, the intuitive empath and the psychic abilities really were like at play for me. And that was the direction that I really, for my own well-being, needed to go in with my business. I was worried about what other people thought about that. And while I would argue everyone to a degree is a salesperson, you're selling yourself, even if you're, trying to get hired for a job or even in this day and age, by way of actions and just adding value, like sort of, passively demonstrating to an employer why you should maintain your job, right? With a crazy economy that we have. You're always selling yourself to a degree to somebody, whether you realize it or not. And so I think it's important to walk the line of like understanding and respecting how you're perceived by other people, but also realizing that and this is the learning moment for me with this, was that it's not my job to manage their expectations of me or how they react to the things that I'm doing. Like, that's not my business. It really isn't. And that would be, we'll get into, I suppose, probably tools of what to do if you're participating in or are on the receiving end, especially as we go into the holidays here. We'll probably get into that in our discussion, but that would be my number one tip. And I didn't want to forget to mention, is like just letting yourself off the hook of like, it doesn't matter what they think of me, like that. And to not take things personally. So if somebody's gossiping about you, again, it's not your job. It's not your job to manage that or to police them either. The third agreement is don't make assumptions. So this also comes into play with gossip or just how you're communicating with folks in general. And you really see this in family dynamics. It says, have the courage to ask questions and to express what you really want to communicate with others clearly to avoid misunderstandings and drama. With just this one statement, you can completely transform your life. If somebody says something, ask them for clarity. Like, what do you mean by that? Instead of just sticking with, that just harbors resentment. So I think that's important to note. And I think that plays into our gossip as well. And then the last agreement is always do your best. And so the point being there is that, especially if you've engaged in sort of this malicious gossip in the past, that, you back then had different information and different tools than what you do today. So it's your choice today what you do with that. So you kind of have to forgive yourself and others, more than likely, for trespasses in the past, but also know that you're doing the best you can to move forward now. And really, you're a different person now than you were then. So if you can live your life with the 4 agreements, always doing your best, not making assumptions, not taking things personally, and being impeccable with your word. And also your word about yourself too. I didn't touch on that, but the book really talks about negative self-talk and how detrimental that is. And, that is really paramount. And especially with the work I do, you see a lot of self-deprecating people out there. And sometimes it can be funny and like a healthy outlet, but more often than not is really, really folks have a lot of self-hatred. And so here now, if you're hearing gossip about yourself on top of that, or you're participating in gossip, oftentimes it's because it's coming from that place. So being aware of it, working through it. So those are the 4 agreements in a nutshell. I highly encourage you to read the book. And it's great this time of year if you're looking for a little reprieve from the family and the stress for a little bit. It's a quick read, big font. I highly recommend it.
Oh, great. Oh, that's wonderful. Well, yeah. And, since we'll let's just come up with the quick list, and then I want to get into what all you're doing. But let's say at the top of this list, I'm just going to tick some of these things off, and the 4 agreements really fit into it. But I'd say the number one thing is maybe just, if you find yourself desiring to do gossip, ask yourself, why is that? What's going on with me? What am I thinking? What am I concerned about right now? And just take a step back. I also think, like you said, as part of the agreements is just to forgive yourself for feeling bad and for thinking bad thoughts about yourself. Put it aside, give yourself a break. What was another one I was thinking about? And if you find yourself, you're not the gossiper, but you're in a space where there's gossiping, maybe, ask questions and get curious about really how are you feeling about that story? What's going on with you these days? I mean, see if you can get them to talk more personally, or, do something, or just change the subject to something more personal about them, like, well, what are you doing these days for the holidays, or, whatever. I mean, just make a good segue. So those are, I don't know, 2 or 3 things I could think of that probably fit in really well with those 4 agreements.
I pulled, I've worked with thousands of women over the years, and a lot of them I'm still in touch with on social media. And I have an online community that I just posed the question in of what's your experience with gossip? Have you participated in it? Have you been on the receiving end? How did it make you feel? What tips do you have for navigating that, especially this time of year going into the holidays? I got some really interesting information, and somebody mentioned, and she said she tends to be a little more confrontational. That's her personality. But if somebody comes at her with information that she deems gossip, she asks, "Why are you telling me this?" And I'm like, that's interesting.
That's a little hard.
It is. But, for some people that works if you want to like nip it in the bud quickly, right? If you're not, if you're a little more passive than that, then definitely like, hey, why don't we keep it to such and such conversation? And as you mentioned, changing the subject. Some folks were setting ground rules ahead of time, like they knew they were going into it, of like no politics, no religion conversation at the dinner table, like setting the boundaries ahead of time. Some people went so far as to saying, they've just completely cut the gossip mongers out of their life altogether. And I know that can be really difficult, given that it's sort of human nature to sort of engage in this at some point in time or another. But again, you're definitely probably seeing it out of specific people in your life more often than others. And so maybe those are the ones that, as you start to investigate why you would be participating in this, and in some cases, I think they start to feel unpleasant to be around. As if you're into universal law and energy work, as I am, you start to actually feel like, ooh, I don't feel good being around them. It gets easier to a degree of distancing yourself from behavior like that. And then ultimately they either change or they don't, and you make decisions whether you want to be around them or not. So, yeah.
Yeah. And that's true. Yeah. And everybody, you just, but my heart goes out to the gossiper, because I have been one, and depending on your relationship with them, if you recognize that you're coming from a place of fear, maybe, if you can, and if it doesn't bring you down to do it, maybe you can help them.
Yes. In the spiritual world, we call that holding space for somebody. So you're kind of giving them grace and sort of forgiving them for doing that, because oftentimes if you're gossiping about other people, you're not really in tune with what's going on with you. So that's why it's such a great point, Sherry, that you made about like really like stopping and going, what about this is triggering me to have this reaction to that, you know? And then if you can just sit with that, and you were even mentioning before, you know, there's a whole like a worksheet you can kind of work through quickly to investigate what is this about this that's bothering me so much. You don't even have to get to the point of where you would need to like confront them about what's bothering you or bothering you about them. So yeah, there's a lot of ways that you can approach it. I think it's easy for us to throw out ideas, and really it's going to take some practice to find what works for you. But again, to your point, going back to the agreement of you're doing your best, but everyone else is doing their best too. If you can really keep that in mind, and that applies to all things in life, service industry right now, you know, it's nuts out there. So if you can, you know, you're getting disgruntled at Starbucks lines taking too long, you just got to remember, it's like everyone's doing the best they can, given the tools and the information that they have in this moment. So you just have to give everybody a little grace, and that includes yourself too.
Cut some slack to everybody a little bit and help where you can. Well, with that said, I mean, so, you know, I was so grateful you reached out. But tell me exactly what all you do. You have a lot of hats that you wear.
I do. And it was funny that the universe kind of put us together to talk about this topic, because I feel like I've been training for it my whole life with, you know, all the experiences I've had, and then the intuitive empath stuff, and me actually working with clients that are dealing with, you know, self-esteem issues related to either gossip or trauma or comments that people have made to them over the years, or limiting beliefs or whatever, things that have been projected on to people. Yeah, I have a lot of experience in this. And that's why I was so excited, because I feel like our conversation is so important. It's not one that's often had. It should be discussed more, because it's a source of a lot of pain for a lot of people. So I appreciate you asking me to be here. So I have worked in the health and wellness sector, specifically relating to sexual health and wellness, for 13 years. And I left. I also have a corporate background too. So the health and wellness stuff was sort of a part-time thing that I did for fun. Meanwhile, had a business degree and pursued more of a traditional marketing career. And I left that over 6 years ago to pursue my health and wellness business full time. And the health and wellness really relates to the psychology and the biology behind romantic relationships and intimate relationships, not only with your romantic partner, but with yourself. And there's just not a lot of resources out there. I recognize that. I started my business at 21 years old, and I was off of a bad breakup, and I watched my parents have a terrible divorce about that time. And I was really curious about what went wrong, but also realizing there's not a lot of resources out there for me to learn about this or talk about it. So creating that opportunity for other women, specifically my age. And it's just been the fun, helpful thing I did on the side. And then when I got really unhappy at my job, I realized I could be pouring a lot more energy into the thing that brings me joy. And it feels like I'm helping other people, making a bigger impact than doing what I was doing at the day job. So I left that to pursue the coaching, or to pursue that full time. And then meanwhile, discovering why I had chronic depression, anxiety, with the help of a really great therapist who encouraged me to really explore my empath and intuitive abilities. That's when the coaching came into it. I had this years of client base already, where I was using the intuitive stuff and the empathetic abilities that I didn't realize I had and that I was using to then help other people. The clients started then asking me like, okay, well, you helped me navigate relationship stuff. Could you help me get in touch with my own intuition? Could you help me with my business goals or my financial goals or whatever? So that's where the coaching business came into play. And I still have both of those wheels turning. My overall theme, and this really, for me, 2 years ago, the theme was high vibration. Somebody told me, Leah, you're living a high vibe life. And it really stuck with me. And I kind of ran with that. I was like, it's so true. I just want everybody to feel joy and happiness and all the things that come with high vibration, abundance and health and wealth and all the things. So everything I'm doing going forward is going to roll up to that. So again, why gossip, that's such a negative, low vibrational thing. If we can kind of blow the lid off of it, then maybe that will help someone out there. That's important to me. Why I agreed to do it ultimately, to have this conversation today. And so anyways, long story short, my partner lost his job in 2020. And when he's like looking to go back to the environmental health and safety industry or whatever he was deciding, I said, what do you want to do? Like, what's going to be your high vibe thing? He's like, I just want to be outside. He's outdoorsy. He loves to dig in the dirt. So do I. There's nothing more high vibrational than Mother Nature. And so that's how Manscaped's lawn care came to be. So his mom's a master gardener. He's been helping in her garden for years and helping neighbors in his neighborhood. He grew up south of Grand Des Moines, so affluent neighborhood. Keeping up with the Joneses was really important there. So he'd been the hired help for years and years, part-time, and decided to take it full-time. And I'm the marketing communication sort of behind the scenes person of Manscaped's lawn care. And then he's the brawn and as actually executing the work and doing a great job. So together, the two of us have this little, I call it our empire going, and we're trying to make things high vibrational here, and not just in the Des Moines area, but I coach people all over the country. So it's sort of spreading, and I'm having a blast doing it. So there's my long-winded answer to all things Leah Ackerman brand. I have the umbrella brand that I call it, and then all the little columns that shoot up to it.
And I'll be sure to share all the links that I'm asked.
Yes, yes, I will. I'll share with you.
Manscaping. What an appropriate time to start that, as because 2020 we were all outside. We were trying to be outside as much as possible, right? So you want your space to look really nice.
And it's pretty incredible too, just people being at home and not having prioritized their home as much, and then being stuck at it, realizing like, hey, my backyard doesn't look as cool as it used to, or I want to be able to take my work outside with me, and I need a patio installed in order to do that. So it was really, I hate to say this because so much negative came from that. And, my family suffered huge loss in 2020, but like the positive side of that was people were getting more connected to home base and outside, and again, vibrational, and the feeling of security and abundance and health and all the things. So that was definitely the silver lining, I think, one of the silver linings to what we've all experienced in the last couple of years. Yeah.
Whoa. Wow. That sounds really exciting. Well, as I warned you ahead of time, the delicious story is, this is my second vidcast. I've been doing the podcast for some time now, but it's really my excuse to talk about food at some point. No matter what we're talking about, I would like to talk about food at some point. So I warned you to share, to tell me a memorable meal. And so I can't wait to hear what you've got to say.
Yeah. So early October, so about 6 weeks ago, we went to Iceland for like this once in a lifetime trip. We were there 9 days. I'd been worried actually about the food going into it because I'd been warned about what I consider their native delicacies being really specific tastes. I try not to yuck anyone else's yum, but like I'm talking about fermented shark, fermented in sheep's urine and sheep body parts, and puffin, those cute little penguiny birds, and all things cute and fuzzy. Like I just couldn't, and I'm like fully anticipating going and losing all the weight. I packed a gazillion Trader Joe's prepackaged snacks in my luggage, and we got there, and it was literally the most delicious, rich food I've ever had in my life. And it was, their influence is crazy because it's such a small population, 350,000 people or less on the whole island. And they're really spread out and remote. So when you're in the city, for example, there's all this outside influence. So we had really great Vietnamese food, and there was African food. I saw a pho place. There was like a soup, like a dedicated soup restaurant. But then a lot of things were really Americanized. So they had really good burgers and fries and all things rich. So I ended up gaining more weight when we went, even despite all the outdoor activities we were doing. But my favorite moment having a meal was we found this really quaint Italian place of all things. And they had certain specialized dishes that they did, and one of which was a vegan lasagna, which doesn't sound that great, but it was flippin' delicious. Best noodles, thick, yummy red sauce, and drooling thinking about it. It's lunchtime here, and chunky vegetables. And I'm gluten and dairy averse, so I was sort of fully prepared to like feel crummy afterwards, but their food's just so different there. It's regulated differently, and so the quality is so much better. So I didn't have adverse reaction to that. But I think the ambiance of that place, it was so family style. It was a historic home in Reykjavik, right near the water, really unassuming, actually. It didn't seem that anything to write home about from the outside, but the way it was set up, we had this family style table, there were 8 of us on this trip. We were able to connect about our day and kind of talk about the experiences we had in the days ahead, because I think this was on night 2 or 3 of our trip, of a 9-day trip. And it was just a really nice moment, candlelit, and really, nice romantic dinner for 8. But it was a really nice moment that we had on a really busy trip, but it was like a moment where we all kind of unwound a little bit.
And there's something about the unexpected meal that turns out to be a surprise and a delight that just makes it all that much more sweet, I guess, for those moments. When you're anticipating, you're like, I'm not going to be able to eat a thing. And you have not only great food, but a good environment. So, well, it sounds lovely. I didn't realize that Iceland was that small, but I've seen other people share pictures and it looks really beautiful. So
it's gorgeous. If you ever get the opportunity to go, I encourage everyone to go. It changes your perspective on just kind of the way we appreciate nature, or not here maybe so much. And also they're very streamlined. They don't hold a lot of stock in material stuff, and their Nordic sort of, even like their mythology and like their stories and folklore. Like, it's just so interesting and to me inspiring. And then nature, if you're into nature at all, it's the most high vibrational place I've ever visited, and beautiful. Every moment and frame is like a postcard. So the phone gets put away unless you're taking pictures, of course, but it's great. We're going back. We have plans to go back.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Well, that sounds just marvelous. Well, thank you, Leah, for talking about this very painful subject. And I think that the speaking of vibration, the concept of suffering and really trying to reduce suffering, being human is hard, because we're so, we're animals like every other animal, but we've got all this other awareness of pain and shame. So, reducing suffering seems like a really noteworthy thing to do. So, so thank you for being on The Delicious Story. Have a lovely holiday that's gossip-free and filled with more delight.
Yeah, same to you, and same to all of the listeners too. I reiterate that.
Yes, thank you.
And there you have it, another episode of The Delicious Story. Now I'm going to leave you with this week's quote. I'm going to read it. How much time he gains who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does or thinks, but only to what he does himself, to make it just and holy. Marcus Aurelius.